Friends, today I'd like to begin a new preaching series based on a book by the Episcopal Bishop Michael Curry from the United States, a book called Love is the Way. And the book is really a thought-provoking exploration on the meaning of love and the potential for love to truly transform the world. The first chapter begins with an obvious question: what is love? What is this thing called love? And in answering that question, Bishop Curry introduces us to a woman who made an enormous impact on his life, a woman by the name of Josie Robbins. At the time of writing the book, Josie was still alive in her 85th year. The moment that precipitated Josie Robbins coming into his life was, in fact, the death of his own mother, when he and his sister were still children. Josie Robbins wasn't a member of their church. She wasn't even a family friend at the time. She was just a lady who stopped by at his church to drop off her neighbor's child before going on to her own Baptist church. But when she heard about their family situation and asked how she could help, soon thereafter, his father invited her into their home, leading her to the spare room, a spare bedroom, where a pile of clothes lay needing to be ironed. A little later the same day, he rang to say that he was running late at work, and could she please give his kids some lunch. And from that day, as she responded to further requests from his dad for help, Josie Robbins would eventually become a surrogate mother to him and his sister. He writes, "Moved by love, Josie jumped in with both arms and never let go. She became the one who made the hurt go away, as she did so many of the things that their mother used to do for them. And over the years, she was present at all their big family events, from high school to university and his seminary graduations, to weddings, ordinations, births, and baptisms, and on and on and on." For Michael Curry, Josie Robbins became a living example of what love looks like. The kind of love, he says, that is the only way we can actually save the planet. Many languages have several words to encompass different kinds and dimensions of love. And three of the most frequently used in the New Testament, Michael Curry reminds us, are the Greek words eros, philia, and agape. Eros refers to the romantic and sexual love. That is what Valentine's Day is all about. Philia is fraternal, brotherly, or sisterly love, also the bonds of love and affection experienced between friends. And finally, agape, he says, is love for the other, a sacrificial love that seeks the good and the well-being of others and society and of the world. Michael Curry writes that agape is the kind of love that looks outward. It's the kind of love that he experienced through Josie Robbins. It's the kind of love that Jesus seemed to be most interested in. Love in this sense is the firm commitment to act for the well-being of someone other than yourself, opening up the goodness and sweetness of life to them. And Michael Curry says that it can be personal or political, individual or communal, intimate or public. Love, he says, can never be segregated into the private or personal dimensions of life, but extends to and affects all aspects of life. Now, what Michael Curry didn't know as a child was that Josie Robbins's love, shared so generously with his own family, had changed many other lives also. She was in fact the principal of St. Augustine's School, a high school for pregnant and parenting children. And in the 1960s, while most of the rest of society were ready to disown and abandon and shame pregnant teens, she poured her life energy into giving them a chance at a better future for themselves and their children, thus helping thousands of them to complete their high schooling with the opportunity to go on to study further or get a decent paying job. Michael Curry writes that an oft-quoted saying in the New Testament says, God so loved the world that he gave his only son. He says the Greek word for love in the passage is agape, while the Greek word for world is cosmos. And what it really means, he says, is everything that is. Isn't that wonderful? Heartwarming words if you kind of read it in that way. For God so loved the cosmos. God so loved everything that is. Everything that God created, that God gave. God did not take, God gave. As Michael Curry says, this is agape. This is love. It's the way to a new world that looks something more like God's dream for us and for all creation, he says. What Dante spoke of as the love that moves the sun and the stars. Today's reading is from 1 Corinthians 13, the Apostle Paul's inspiring ode to love. It's a passage that is tragically seldom read in churches except at weddings. But as Michael Curry says, when the Apostle Paul wrote those words, he wasn't at a wedding. He wasn't giving advice to young couples on how to make their marriage work. Paul's words were in fact written for a dysfunctional church community in Corinth, in which its members had forgotten all of the values of Jesus of Nazareth that had first brought them together and meant that they were in fact ripping each other apart. They were a community splitting into factions according to who had baptized who. Members were suing each other in the secular courts. Some were sleeping with other members' spouses. The rich and the well-to-do were demanding that they receive communion first, and others were getting drunk at communion. And in the midst of all of this is a community arguing about who was more spiritual than who. Bishop Curry says, it is behavior that's decidedly contemporary, reflecting much of the behavior and the attitudes expressed so often on social media platforms today. Arrogant, rude, insisting on its own way, irritable, resentful, rejoicing in wrongdoing. And so Paul reminds the church in Corinth of the kind of love that they should be nurturing as a church community built around the values of Jesus. The only kind of love, he says, that can save a divided community. Bishop Curry writes that you might think that the opposite of love is, in fact, hate. But if love looks outward to the good of the other, then its opposite, he says, is not hate. Rather, its opposite is, in fact, selfishness, a life completely centered on the self. He goes on to say that intuitively we all understand that nothing good ever came from selfishness and greed. In contrast to love, selfishness, he says, is the most destructive force in the cosmos, and hate is only a symptom. Selfishness, he says, destroys families, it destroys communities, it destroys societies, nations, and global communities. And he says, it will destroy the human race by laying waste to our planet if we let it. But by contrast, he says, love is the only thing that has ever changed the world for the better, seen in people who have dedicated themselves to the growth and the flourishing of others, of their communities, and of the world. This includes parents and teachers, dedicated to the flourishing of the children under their care, In fact, it includes anyone and everyone who in their neighborhoods and places of work dedicate themselves to living not just for themselves, but for others and for the greater good. People like Josie Robbins, Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, William Wilberforce, the great abolitionist, and Malala Yousafzai, the activist for girls' education, and the youngest Nobel laureate who survived an assassination attempt by the Taliban and who continues to advocate for education and equality for girls. As Michael Curry writes, love is a firefighter running into a burning building, risking his or her life for someone that he doesn't even know. Love is that first responder hurtling towards an emergency, a catastrophe, a disaster. Love is also someone protesting anything that hurts or harms the children of God, he says. As Jesus says hours before his crucifixion in John's Gospel, no one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Where selfishness excludes, love makes room and includes. Where selfishness puts others down, love lifts up. Where selfishness hurts and harms, says Michael Curry, love helps and heals. Where selfishness enslaves, love sets free and liberates. And finally, Michael Curry says that love is God's GPS or sat-nav for living. Getting back to Paul and that dysfunctional Christian community in Corinth, Paul concludes his exhortation to them on love with these words, and now faith, hope, and love abide, and the greatest of these is love. Michael Curry writes that faith is another word for trust, and without trust, society falls apart. Every society depends on trust. Without trust, government is useless and relationships are impossible. Without trust, he says, it's every human being for him or herself, and that will end up only in a mess. And so faith, says Michael Curry, is a radical act of trust in reality. It is to dare to live and to act as though the moral arc of the universe is long and bent towards justice, even if you can't see its end. Nothing short of faith can stay the course. He says it dares us to believe that in the end, even if we can't see it, love will win. And then comes hope, which Michael Curry says puts the wind in our sails of faith. For it is the energy that keeps us going when life gets tough. He says it was Dante who imagined the gates of hell with a signpost above it, abandon hope, all who enter here. Without hope, Bishop Curry says that life becomes mere survival. But with hope, he says you can march through hell for a heavenly cause. But while faith and hope are necessary for a full life, Bishop Curry says that they are not a guide for life. They don't tell you what to do. That, he says, is the purpose of love. It is love that tells you how to direct the energy of faith and hope. He says that if faith and hope are the wind and the sails, then love is life's rudder. It is God's GPS or sat-nav, for the way of love will show us the right thing to do every single time. He says it is a moral and spiritual grounding and a place of rest amidst the chaos that is often part of life. He says it's how we stay decent in indecent times. And although the way of love is not easy, He reminds us that it is the only thing that has ever made a positive difference in this world. What is love to you? What are the places in your life where you are needing love's care? And what are the places in your life where love might be calling you to reach out beyond yourself, to make a difference for someone else and in the world? God bless you as you contemplate these things. Amen.